All right. Well, it's that time of my life where I am staying in and not really traveling, just trying to get my life together before going to ruin it all on the road in a couple of months. So I figure, meanwhile, I'm going to do this tier list. This is the Brooklyn neighborhoods tier list. There's some things that are subjective here, some things that are really personal preference and my own taste. Like, for instance, I like places that are very industrial, and not a lot of people relate to that. And then there are some things that are just sort of objective, like, you don't really want to live in the hood, let's say. Even people who live in the hood don't want to live in the hood, for instance. So let's get on with it. The first pick that I have here is Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. Really great neighborhood for going out to restaurants, bars, park space, very peaceful, very affordable, very family oriented. So, because of that, I'm putting that up in the S tier. I have been in Brooklyn for the past 25 years, in New York City for the past 25 years, but Brooklyn specifically. So, that is sort of my claim to ranking these neighborhoods. Okay, so the next one is Diker Heights. You can see the big Christmas lights display that they have there. They got some nice Italian shops and stuff, some nice pizzerias and such, but overall, it's like a little too residential and like high class and conservative for me. And that's another thing where you'll see personal preference. Like neighborhoods that tend to be very conservative. I don't really like. I don't really consider Bay Ridge to be conservative. I do find it like very much moderate neighborhood. It maybe is more conservative for New York, but overall it's like very small business oriented. But yeah, Diker, there's just like not a lot of green space. Honestly, there's not a lot going on there. Like at least in Bay Ridge, you have these bars and restaurants, and Diker, it's really not so much of that. The Christmas lights display is really nice though. This next one is Bath Beach. Really not a neighborhood that I really think about or anyone really thinks about. It's just very low key. It's in sort of the middle of nowhere, honestly. It's just very residential, and that's really all there is to it. I can't really say anything nice about it because there's not a whole lot there. And for that reason, for New York, it goes in the D tier. The next one is Bensonhurst. Yeah, and that's a very telling little picture for Bensonhurst. We've got the Chinese noodle and dumpling shop right next to the pizzeria, which shows the sort of tension and dichotomy of the old Italian neighborhood versus the newer wave of Chinese immigrants who have come in and sort of taken up more of the space there. And I think that both of those things are actually really part of what makes the neighborhood great. I love the pizzerias there. I love the little sushi restaurants there where you can actually still, maybe not anymore, but you used to be able to get rolls a few years ago for like $3 for 6 rolls, and they would have all these lunch deals and stuff. Very underrated neighborhood, I would say. Really a lot to do as far as like restaurants and stuff, which is always a big sell for me. One of the most highly ranked pizzerias, LNB, is out in Bensonhurst, so you have to give some credit for that. So I would put it very high up in the B tier. It does get a little industrial looking at parts, but I do love it. Next one is Gravesend. Again, one of those neighborhoods where it's really just sort of in the middle of nowhere and there's not much to write home about. It's not bad per se, it's just there's nothing really there. And when that's the case, I put it in the D tier. We have Seagate, one of my least favorite neighborhoods in New York, because one, it's a gated community, which is weird. Like, why are you having a gated community in New York City? But okay, let's say, you're into that and that's your right to do that. But the weird thing is, as a gated community, it's not even safer than other New York City neighborhoods. Like the whole point of a gated community is to be safer. But then, like the times I've been inside Seagate, it feels kind of like impoverished and full of just like schizophrenic cat ladies that chase you off of the beach or something. It seems like a God, like one of those like smallpox islands where we used to quarantine people. I feel like maybe we just low key put all the crazy people there. I really don't like the vibe of this place. So I'm putting it in the F tier. Next one is Coney Island. A lot of people have great memories going to Coney Island and to the boardwalk. But the problem is that Coney Island is not just the theme park, it's also the neighborhood. And the neighborhood really does get pretty hood at a certain point. Like once you go past the train station and deeper towards the Seagate area, it starts to become all Section 8 housing. And one other thing that I dislike about the neighborhood is these very wide streets that are very like car dominated and car oriented, which doesn't really mesh for me with the vibe of New York as a city. So for those reasons, it does get some points off, and I put Coney Island in the C category. There is a beach there, but it's not really a beach you would want to go to. Speaking of beach, the next one is Brighton Beach. It's a neighborhood that definitely has character. There's a lot of Eastern European and Central Asian immigrants. It's like a big ex-Soviet enclave, pretty much. And so because of that, you have the Uzbek supermarkets like Tashkent. You've got a lot of like Russian and Ukrainian restaurants and such along the boardwalk, but also just along the streets themselves. It's a neighborhood with like a lot of character for sure. But in some places, it does feel a tiny bit run down and a little bit trenchy, and that I would say takes points off of it. So I would probably put it a little lower in the B category. The next neighborhood is Manhattan Beach, one neighborhood over. This is sort of like the nicer Russian speaking area. This is like once you've made it, or if you already had money to begin with and you come from a Russian speaking family, you might buy some sort of like really nice home out there. They've got probably one of the nicest beaches in Brooklyn of the big three. But once again, my problem with it, although the neighborhood is peaceful, which I do like, is there's kind of nothing really there as far as, like a scene with bars and restaurants and such. And so that's going to take points off of it. But again, it really comes down to your own preference for a lot of these things. But for that, I would put it in the C category. The next neighborhood that we're looking at is Sheepshead Bay. So again, another big Eastern European and Russian speaking community out there. This is sort of like the middle ground between Brighton Beach and Manhattan Beach. It's sort of like where the middle class Russian speakers end up going. And so they have a pretty interesting nightlife scene. It's like a lot of people who would do the sorts of things like go to hookah lounges back home. They would find that over here. And that's like a little piece of home that they get to take with them. And that's pretty cool. It's not my scene, but I do appreciate it a lot. I do actually like walking along the bay. It is pretty nice. So I'll put it up in the B category. The next one is Marine Park. A little bit conservative for me, a little bit too car oriented and a little bit too like there's not a lot to do there. Like it's a place where you would go raise a kid and it would have kind of a suburban feel to it, but there would be nothing for the kid to do except like go to Dunkin' Donuts or something. I do have some good memories associated with Marine Park and the neighborhood itself as well as the park. And I do like the salt marsh. I'm not going to deny that they have some good things there, but overall, a lack of activity tends to get you kind of lower down on this list. So I'm going to put it in the C category. The next one is Flatlands, really one of my least favorite neighborhoods, not because it's hood, it does get a little lower class, but that's never been a problem for me. The problem for me is that there's really just nothing to do there. And you can already see just by the picture I chose, the car dependent infrastructure, which the problem that breeds oftentimes is it leads to a lot of chain stores opening up, a lot of like basically box stores and mall and retail outlets, which again is sort of antithetical to the character of New York. It's sort of the opposite of what New York is supposed to represent, because New York is supposed to be a place where you can find lots of local shops, and it has this diversity of culture, and Flatland sort of represents this monoculture that you can find in the rest of the United States. And there's barely a sidewalk. If you can ever make it to a sidewalk there, it's like covered in weeds and stuff. So forget walking or biking there ever. And once again, there's just like a lack of unique activities. I don't consider going to the mall a selling point for living in New York City. So I'm putting this squarely in the F row. All right, this next one is Garrettson Beach. Not my favorite neighborhood, I have to say. Once again, that's part of it is the conservative vibe that it has. Um, and then also, it's sort of got this like rough feel to it. Like a lot of houses there seem kind of run down. Some of them are nice, but some of them just feel kind of grimy to me. And that's what I've always associated Garrettson Beach with. They do have the nice sort of salt marshy area that's over there, which I do like. And, people would go out there to, I guess, dump cars or go to raves and stuff like that. Maybe it was a bigger thing 10, 20 years ago than it is today. But once again, really not a lot going on in that neighborhood, sort of residential. I guess if you sort of don't mind living in that kind of neighborhood and you want to have a boat or something, some people prioritize that and you would enjoy it for that reason. But it's always been a little like weirdly grimy to me. So I'll put it in the D row. Next one here is Mill Basin, sort of a step up from Garrettson Beach. It's like kind of the same vibe, I would say. It's one of those little peninsulas on the east side of Brooklyn. It's definitely higher class than Garrettson Beach, but again, like a little conservative for my taste, and not like in the sort of like poor roughneck conservative way that Garrettson can be, but more in like sort of live in your own little enclave and don't interact with anyone else sort of thing. And again, if that's your vibe, then that's your vibe, right? You might love it for that reason. But once again, it's sort of like, why live in New York City for that reason? So I'm putting this in the C category. Bergen Beach, I guess it's, from what I recall, sort of middle class, sort of in between what Mill Basin and Garrettson Beach represent. There's not a whole lot going on there. So it is fine. Like it's nice to be by the water, I guess, but when there's not a lot going on, that's points off. So I put this in the C category. Then Canarsie, no one wants to live in the hood, and Canarsie is largely the hood. There's once again, it suffers from a lot of the problems that these neighborhoods in East Brooklyn suffer from, where the car dependent infrastructure leads to all the chain stores and stuff. So Canarsie, because of that, tends to lose out on unique culture. I know Pop Smoke is from there, but it's not a safe neighborhood, generally speaking. And that's not racially motivated, because you will see there are some like majority minority neighborhoods here that I rank very highly. And it's not their fault, that they ended up like that. It's the result of things like urban planning and just factors related to history. There are minority neighborhoods that fare a lot better that you'll see here, but unfortunately, Canarsie, as it is today, is still sort of the hood, and there's really not much reason for most people to go there. Okay, the next one is going to be East New York. Once again, very similar sort of vibe and very similar sort of problems to Canarsie that I mentioned. It is sort of gentrifying. That there has been a big wave to push it as like the next big real estate thing, and that has sort of cleaned up areas of it. I do kind of like the industrial vibe in some of the parts of East New York, and I do like visiting the East New York Tunnel and some of the memories that I've got into there. It is hood, but it has like an industrial edge to it. I've discovered also like an entire abandoned factory there and an abandoned block pretty much of row houses. And that's something I would never have found anywhere else in the city. So, for those reasons, that actually kind of pushes it up because those I think are pretty unique features of the area. But overall, it would probably be lower in the C tier ranking. Okay, next neighborhood is Cypress Hills, one of my least favorite Brooklyn neighborhoods, probably my least favorite, honestly, as far as um, crime goes. And I know that sounds kind of funny coming from me, but I'm talking about like actual crime, like violent crime, not like bullshit, like property crime, like, oh, you tagged a gate or something, or you went into this abandoned building. I'm talking like people actually get hurt here. They do have kind of, from what I recall, sort of like a nice hill and like a nice little park up by a cemetery, but you don't really want to live by a cemetery, right? Really not my favorite neighborhood. Some bad memories associated with this place, and just it just feels generally unsafe. Sometimes you catch a vibe from a neighborhood and it just sinks pretty far for you. So my least favorite neighborhood, probably in the whole city. I would very happily avoid it if I could. And another neighborhood to avoid is Brownsville. Once again, you can tell by the image that's here, it's pretty much all project buildings. There's really no reason to go out there. And unlike East New York, which actually has some cool industrial abandoned things that are worth seeing, there's really not a whole lot seeing in Brownsville. It's sort of known as one of the most dangerous Brooklyn neighborhoods. People who are from there do not want to be there. I generally do not want to be there if I ever end up there. And usually, when I end up at these places, it tends to be 3 a.m. because of the life I lead sometimes. So, again, I've been fine, but it's just not really a place you want to end up in. I'd put this in the D row. Next one is Burrow Park, probably one of the nicer, what I call the Jaberhoods of Brooklyn, like the majority Jewish or Hasidic Jewish neighborhoods specifically. And this is probably one of the nicest enclaves that they built out for themselves. You go there and it really feels like you are in Israel or you are in Jerusalem or somewhere. Like everything is in Hebrew. The community is very tightly knit. And there is something kind of quaint about it, just being in the middle of Brooklyn. And I like neighborhoods with very distinctive characters. So for that reason, for me, I would put it a little lower in the B category, but still in the B row, just because it's got that distinctive character to it. Okay, the next neighborhood is Flatbush. This is one of those majority minority neighborhoods that I really love and that I think represents the best of what Brooklyn has to offer because it's incredibly diverse. There's a really big, particularly Caribbean scene over there. If you want to get Caribbean food, typically this is the place to go. There is sort of like a gentrification push on a side of Flatbush, the Prospect Lefferts Gardens side, and that has some incredibly nice houses. And so because of the gentrification there is this sort of dichotomy of you have these nicer bars and restaurants that cater to the people with money, but then you also still have the like Caribbean and Haitian side to it. It does tend to be one of my favorite neighborhoods, particularly how close it is to Prospect Park is a really big selling point. So this is a neighborhood that I think represents the best of what Brooklyn has to offer in terms of diversity, bars, restaurants. And so for that reason, I put it up in the A tier. Another neighborhood that I really like is Sunset Park. This is a majority Hispanic neighborhood. I really love the park up here. I really love the shops. I remember like there was a Turkish restaurant that I went to out here. I love that the highest points in Brooklyn are here and it overlooks the the buildings of Manhattan. And I love that you can go down to the waterfront and go to like the really industrial, gritty side of Industry City and see like the old trolley tracks and the abandoned buildings and such. So Sunset Park to me is so distinctive, and I have such a history of memories associated with it. Once again, the character of the neighborhood really helps it pop out. So I would put Sunset Park up in the A row. Flatbush is probably an A minus, but this is squarely an A. And then Park Slope. It is a really nice neighborhood. Park Slope sort of represents the stereotype that conservatives have about the way that liberals act, where it's like you live in your super nice house and you don't care about the poor or the working class except from a distance, right? Park Slope is an incredibly peaceful neighborhood. It has a great restaurant scene. It has some decent bars here and there, and it is pretty distinctive in terms of all the brownstone buildings. That's like such an amazing unique feature of Brooklyn that you really don't see in too many other places. Just I love those old style buildings, which you're not going to see a whole lot of throughout New York City. There's only a few neighborhoods that really specialize in it, and Park Slope does it very well. To their credit and their detriment, they have been good at keeping development out of the neighborhood, which is a problem because this leads to things like homelessness. People from here will say that they're against, but the way that they vote and the policies that they enact are sort of anti that. So it's like, what's really going on? I do like the proximity to the park. This is like a neighborhood to go and raise a family and go walk your dog to the park and then go get a membership at some sort of nice gym and be in your 30s and 40s living your best upper class life. So despite its problems, I would still put it in the A row. Then Crown Heights. This is another majority minority neighborhood that I really love. Although that might be changing, it is gentrifying quite a bit. But things that I love about Crown Heights, anywhere along the shuttle, along Franklin Avenue, great bar scene, great restaurant scene, very fun place to be. And then around there, I love the sort of industrial section of Crown Heights. I've had really great memories just walking along the shuttle track area. I guess people would say on the other end of Crown Heights, it does get a little more dangerous. But that said, I've never had a problem there. That's not to say that people haven't, but that doesn't take away from my ranking of it because there's so much that makes the neighborhood good that I would rank it pretty highly. And for me, because I have so many good memories associated with it, I would put it somewhere maybe in the lower A rung. Then there's GoOnas. GoOnas is a super industrial, super low key neighborhood. I don't think it was ever really meant to be residential. There was just this wave of development that hit New York City about 30-ish years ago that all sort of hit the north-ish edge of Brooklyn. So GoOnas was part of that. Now they're dredging the canal because there's so much industrial and chemical pollutants that have gone on there that the EPA had to get involved and just be like, yeah, we're cleaning this damn thing up. And now it actually doesn't quite smell as bad as it used to maybe about 15 years ago. I remember around that time I would go by the canal and it would just smell so rank and so awful. And these days it's not quite as bad. And so I love like the low key aspect of GoOnas and how kind of slept on it is. It's sort of building its own scene now with its own like kind of cool bar scene. It's a neighborhood. I hate to use this term, but it really is like an up and coming neighborhood with a lot of potential. Despite the smell of the canal, I do have to put it in the A row. I just really love this neighborhood so much. Then we have Bed-Stuy. Bed-Stuy has changed dramatically since I have been a child. Bed-Stuy used to be known as the hood, as like the bad neighborhood. Biggie was from there, and a couple other famous rappers that I'm forgetting as well. So Bed-Stuy was known as like the hood and sort of like the maybe the crack, maybe not capital, but like a spot where you could easily get that. And there's still a little bit of that going on today. There's the remnants of it, but Bed-Stuy has gentrified so hard, and gentrification brings a lot of there's good and bad, right? Objectively, there is good and bad. It does over time lower crime, and you can't deny that. And it does, as a consequence, often bring in development with businesses such as bars and restaurants, and it does diversify the neighborhood. But it also has been known as like a big area of gentrification where it's pushed a lot of residents out. It's pushed a lot of particularly minority residents out, or just lower income residents out. And that is the big criticism of gentrification, is that that is an inevitable consequence. And, eventually I'm sure my friends who live here are going to get priced out. There's no way around it, unfortunately, because it is a hot property. It's a nice neighborhood to be in, a hell of a lot more than it was 20 years ago, and you can't deny that. I would probably put Bed-Stuy as like a B plus at this point. This is a very fitting one. This is a photo of a mural in Bushwick with a little Optimo tag, and it says, "Where is the real NYC?" Which is very fitting given that Bushwick is heavily gentrified. A lot of the negative aspects of gentrification have really taken off here, because I used to love the sort of like more industrial, more Hispanic side of Bushwick back when that was what Bushwick was known for. And now it's just known for white people with septum piercings and sort of like this non-binary vibe to come there and vibe out and just pretend it's Berlin, which, I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not fun to go to some of those functions, but a lot of the time it's just really not my scene. And in particular, like a lot of the people who live there are like the children of rich kids who are like these quasi leftist types who, I don't know, they just like post communist quotes on Twitter and then do nothing for the actual community. So Bushwick is a very fun spot to go out at night. I can't deny that. It's got a ton to do, but it's got like a lot of the negatives that I see with gentrification. So I am putting it on the B row, but I would say it's a solid B minus for me. And then Williamsburg, this is all of the worst aspects of gentrification here. So Williamsburg, unfortunately, has had its character completely destroyed. There's maybe a few cool bars left, but all the nightlife that used to be there 10, 15 years ago has pretty much migrated out to Bushwick. Williamsburg at this point just feels like the financial district in Manhattan. You're there late night and there's nothing going on. Nobody can afford to live here. There is no such thing pretty much as a room for under $4,000 a month here. Everything that everybody hates about gentrification is located in Williamsburg. And at that point, you have to be working in tech or finance to be living out here. At least in Bushwick, maybe you could sort of carve out your little grimy niche in this $900 a month apartment with roaches, and you're working as an artist. And I can at least appreciate that. But Williamsburg has been so utterly, what is the word I'm looking for? Like corporatized and whitewashed and been made completely generic, which is kind of funny because hipster culture used to be something that was like super new and cool, and now it's just like so sterile because those people grow up and get these nice jobs, as is their right to do so at that age. But there's just something in the neighborhood, in like the arts, that is lost there. And so Williamsburg, I'm going to put in the C category. It is still a fun spot to go out, but there's just all of the bad things about gentrification sort of exist over there. Then we've got Greenpoint next to Williamsburg. I like Greenpoint a lot. I like the old Polish neighborhood vibe. I like that you can go out and get pierogies or go to that donut spot where they're making the donuts at 5 a.m. Fun spot for going out to bars and restaurants. They've got like a nice sort of industrial section, a lot of great memories in Greenpoint. And so I would put it in maybe like a B plus. The next one is Midwood. Midwood is sort of a low key neighborhood. There's really nothing to sort of write home about with Midwood. It's got a bunch of local shops and restaurants and stuff. It's got a very big Arabic community living alongside a very big Jewish community. So that's always an interesting dichotomy to witness. It's just a very low key neighborhood. If you are looking to live somewhere in New York City, it's probably one of the last affordable places where you can find rent as far as like a working or lower middle class neighborhood goes. And for that reason, I do give it a lot of points and a lot of credit. So I put that in the B category. Then there's Red Hook. I do love the industrial vibe of Red Hook. I love the old Red Hook grain terminal and the cranes that you see by IKEA. I love all the old brick buildings and the cobblestone streets. I love that one of the oldest pubs in New York is located out there. I love that you can see the Statue of Liberty from there. I love like the sort of secret-ish events that go on there because it's still pretty industrial and low key. It is next to the projects for sure, but that doesn't detract from its appeal for me. If I was to take someone to maybe 10 different neighborhoods in Brooklyn, one of them would be Red Hook, just to show them like this really old historic side to the city. So I would put it in the A category. Then there's Clinton Hill by Fort Greene Park, incredibly nice neighborhood. Again, points for a bar and restaurant scene, points for being very walkable, points for having a lot of green space. I really don't have anything bad to say about it. I think as far as like neighborhoods go, it's also still getting less affordable now, but hasn't fully gentrified yet. And it's one of the neighborhoods where if I could afford it, I would probably end up living. So I put this probably on the in the S tier for me. Next neighborhood is Dumbo. Once again, love the sort of gritty industrial vibe. Don't love all the tourists that hang out there. There's definitely points off for that. Everyone's trying to get their little selfie, and the spot in between the two blocks where you can see the Manhattan Bridge. But you know, you've got to give points for brick buildings and cobblestone streets. Unfortunately, because it's so close to the water, it's very prone to flooding, just like a lot of New York City has become lately. So that is a big challenge for the neighborhood, but I do really love the vibe there. It's, I think, still coming into its own. It hasn't really formed an identity yet. It hasn't even been called Dumbo for more than maybe 30 years. So they're still figuring it out, but I do like the direction that it's going in. It is a pretty expensive neighborhood, but if you're a tourist, go and see it. I would put it in the B, maybe a B plus row. Then there's downtown Brooklyn. They've got a lot of tall buildings, but the one thing that I dislike about downtown Brooklyn is I associate it with a lot of the social services buildings and a lot of luxury housing that has been built. And so, just like the dichotomy of that, you've got all these homeless people on Fulton Street. And then next to that, you've got people going to their luxury apartments. And something about it just never quite sat right with me because you can just see the contrast so in your face, and it represents a lot of the negative of New York. So I do love the tall buildings, of course. I do love that it has its own skyline, but it is kind of sterile. There's not a lot of like distinctive character to the neighborhood. Anything that's there has been built in the last 5 or 10 years and is probably like a chain store, like a Sweet Green or a Shake Shack, which, not to say I don't go to those places, but that's just not what you're in New York City for. So I would put this in the C row. And then, sort of a nice neighborhood overlooking the Manhattan skyline is Brooklyn Heights. If you have a ton of money, this is probably where you're going to want to get some sort of housing. It does have kind of like this upper class exclusionary feel to me, where it's like, oh, we're on this hill overlooking everything and it's kind of nice. But I just never quite felt welcome in the neighborhood. It always felt very much like, oh, I can't afford to be here every time I was here, which is more a reflection of me than the neighborhood itself. If you have money, by all means, go there. It's one of those places where it's like nice, but it can get a little more sterile. There are some nice things, there are some nice houses, but there's not a ton to do. And the whole point of being in New York, or one of the major selling points, is nightlife, which Brooklyn Heights does not really have, but nice neighborhood overall, not affordable by any stretch of the imagination. And then this sort of little trifecta, Carroll Gardens, absolutely beautiful neighborhood. Once again, this is one of those like old style neighborhoods with these brick buildings where I would go and live if I had money. They still have a restaurant scene and a bar scene, which is surprising for a place that's kind of like on the more affluent side. It is still a fun spot to go out, surprisingly. But it's also, even though it's fun to go out there, you can still have like a peaceful night in and live there with kids, and it feels relatively safe. So, Carroll Gardens, I would put like in the A plus, and then I sort of combined Borum Hill and Cobble Hill into that, where I would also put it in the A row. What I have to say about those neighborhoods is just all very similar to each other. They're a pretty similar trifecta of neighborhoods. And then the last one is Vinegar Hill. This is a weird one. It's like super oddly industrial, just right next to Dumbo. It's really hard to even get into this neighborhood because there's so few streets that lead into it. There's maybe only 2 or 3 streets, and three might be generous, that really go into this neighborhood. So I'm saying the same things over and over, but I love the brick and cobblestone. I like the industrial vibe. I like the old school vibe, but there's just not a lot to do. I would put this in the B row. And so that, oh my God, that took forever. Yeah, kind of looks like I'm giving you the finger, which is a pretty good representation of Brooklyn and the vibe overall. Yeah, there's my ranking of Brooklyn neighborhoods. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you hate me. No, don't actually. I've got my own. Well, I wouldn't care either way. And yeah, come fight me about it in the comments.